Welcome, everybody. This is the 15th anniversary of our annual policy conference. We actually, as many of you know, a couple years ago celebrated our 15th anniversary of the founding of the Free State Foundation back in 2006. And so we're excited now that this is the 15th anniversary policy conference. I know that every year, at least probably for 12 of those 13 years, I've said, wow, I can't believe it's, 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever. So just to be consistent, I'm going to say, wow, I can't believe it's our 15th anniversary of the policy conference. I think this conference, without a doubt, in my mind, will be as important and informative and impactful as the others. We've got an outstanding group of speakers here today, and you've got the brochures there, so I'm not going to go over the agenda except to say that the first speaker, the keynoter, will be Congressman Bob Latta, and I'll give him a proper introduction, of course. We're going to have our usual buffet lunch around 11:45, 12 o'clock or so, and it's going to be right over there to my left. It happens that today is the 52nd anniversary of Laurie and myself today, so she deserves most of that applause. I don't know whether she's here. I see her back there, and I haven't told her this yet. But Laurie, this buffet is going to substitute for our usual anniversary dinner that we usually have. But it'll be a good one, Laurie. Throughout the conference, we're going to have plenty of back and forth discussion, as we usually do, regarding broadband deployment and adoption, universal service reform, spectrum policy, wireless regulation, the changing video services landscape and the appropriate regulatory responses, privacy and data security regulation, as well as cancel culture and other issues. At the Free State Foundation, we make no bones about our commitment to free market and free speech principles, along with respect for property rights and the rule of law. But from our founding, we have always made clear that we want to listen to and learn from those with different perspectives. You will see that diversity reflected today in our program. I'm personally concerned about the rampant cancel culture that threatens to undermine the free speech values at the heart of our constitutional culture, at which the First Amendment plays obviously a central role. Over the past couple of years, I've been writing about this topic in my ongoing series, Thinking Clearly About Speaking Freely, and those essays you can find on the Free State Foundation website. I think today, more than ever, it's important that we be able to discuss issues in a civil way and in a respectful way. At the Free State Foundation, we've always made that one of our hallmarks, and I'm proud that I know that we'll continue to do that. Now, before we get officially started with Congressman Latta, I want to remind you the hashtag today, it's on your table as well, is pound FSF conference, CONF 15. You've got that on the table, so I hope you'll tweet away. And now introduce our opening keynote speaker, Congressman Bob Latta. So if I had to choose a guest to help me celebrate our 52nd anniversary, I couldn't choose anyone I'd like more than, I better be careful here, but Bob Latta certainly would be one of them. And welcome back, Congressman Latta. I say welcome back because it's been a couple years, but we've been fortunate and grateful that you've appeared at, I think, 3 or 4 previous Free State Foundation events. So we're pleased that you're here again. I'm going to do throughout the day the short versions of bios. You have a full bio in these brochures. So with your permission, I'm going to do the short version of yours too.
Real short.
So the real important thing is that Congressman Latta, of course, he's a senior member of the House Commerce Committee, and also, and even maybe more significantly or as significantly, he's the chairman of the House Communications and Technology Subcommittee that has jurisdiction over so many of the issues that we're going to talk about today. If I had to pick out just one more thing when I looked at this bio, and you can look at it, but he's of course, co-chair of the Rural Broadband Caucus, but also there was another caucus that I thought was interesting here, which I don't see now. But we're really grateful that you took time today to be here. I know you've got a committee hearing later, so without any further ado, please welcome Congressman Bob Latta, please.
Thank you. Well, good morning, and thanks for having me back. And I'm looking around the room, I see the state flags. I'm trying to find Ohio real quick. Hope it wasn't taken down because I'm here. But really appreciate it again. And, you know, it's so good that things are operating again, coming in from the Capitol just a little bit ago. We're looking at all the school groups, the kids going back up to visit our nation's capital, and I felt so bad for all the kids that didn't get to come. And I know some school groups or schools were saying that they were going to even make a time to bring extra kids because the kids that didn't get to come, because I think it's so important for them to come to our nation's capital and to see where their laws are made. And I was a historian by training and also an attorney. But it's so important, I think, that we understand our nation and our nation's past and where we are and how we got here. But as mentioned, I am the chair of the Communications and Technology Subcommittee on Energy and Commerce. We believe Energy and Commerce is the best committee in Congress because we also have the broadest jurisdiction of any committee in the House. So when you think of communications and technology, you think of energy and healthcare and environment. And then we have oversight, and we have what I used to chair several Congresses ago, the digital, what we called it at that time, digital commerce and consumer protection. So it's a very broad jurisdiction. And the great thing about it is some of these tie in together, that when we're working on something, something on communications and technology might tie into health, something might tie into energy. But the one thing I want to make mention is this: the Energy and Commerce Committee, when you're on it, we're looking over the horizon 5 to 10 years, because we have to be doing that. Because again, we cannot put laws, then having regulations put into place that are going to hinder Americans out there and our entrepreneurs and innovators. So we have to make sure we get it right, and having it done through the hearing process. And then also about the hearing process, I know that, I think somebody told me the other day we did 42 committee hearings and subcommittee meetings in one day in the House. I'm not sure if that's a record, but I'm glad to know that we're working. And so we're going to make sure that the committees are working, because again, I'm a firm believer in the committee process, because the bills have to come through the committee process. It should be a bottom up, not a top down, because by having the committee process and having the witness appear before us is how we get that information and how we learn. So it's important what we're doing. And mentioning about broadband, I'm one of the co-founders of the Rural Broadband Caucus and how important it is out there to have broadband. And especially when you think about what happened with COVID, when everything shut down, it's interesting because I said how things tie together. I remember being in a briefing or a meeting and hearing people saying that telehealth will never work. Telehealth's never going to work. And about 4 to 5 weeks into COVID, all I was hearing, if we didn't have telehealth, we'd be shut down right now. And so it's important that we have the broadband out there, and especially what we have to have is the oversight, and that's the other thing about the committee processes that's so important, is that we have the oversight of the NTIA and the FCC. We've got to get them in, especially when you're thinking about the $42 billion and then the $18 billion on top of that when you coming through the infrastructure package when you're talking about broadband and how we're going to be out there. But I think one of the things that they missed in the package when they put the legislation together was really on the permitting reform, because it takes so long to get something done that we've got to keep moving things along. You know, I've never heard anybody, and again, we have such broad jurisdiction, but I have never heard anybody in any industry from Silicon Valley to manufacturing ever say that they were against regulation. But they all pretty much said the exact same thing. Just give us soft touch regulations out there that we can live with. And I think that's really important. And I know that when Peter Welch and I, and you know, Peter's left the House and gone over to the Senate, but when we were working on the Internet of Things, that we had about 6 different informal meetings. But everybody said the same thing. It's just give us that soft touch out there. But we have to make sure that you know, we have the right regulations in place, and I think that's important. But again, as I said, I think that they missed a real point when it came to permitting reform when they were working on the legislation. Because again, when you think about $42 billion and another $18 billion, we want to make sure that that is going out to our unserved areas. Because when I look at areas in my district, because if you go back several years ago, when Chairman Pai was at the FCC, they sent around and had these maps and saying that, okay, these are the maps of the United States where everybody has coverage. And I'll never forget talking to the chairman and then said, you know, I hate to tell you this, your maps are wrong. I said, these are absolutely wrong, because I can go across my district and I know exactly who has it and who doesn't. And you know, here's the thing you have to think about, because my district is probably the longest, widest district now in the state of Ohio. I go about 185 miles east to west, or 230 miles diagonally. But when you get into these areas that do not have any broadband coverage, first of all, it would put them at a disadvantage for their students during COVID, because you could send kids home with a laptop, but if they didn't have coverage, what good was it? So they'd have to go to a school or a parking lot or someplace else just to be able to get the broadband. You couldn't have the telehealth services out there. You couldn't have business and farmers out there for precision agriculture that I've also worked on, didn't have that coverage. So if you don't have the coverage, and I always have to ask this question, and I'm not being biased about one industry or another. In the last 5 years, who's looked in the yellow pages? Anybody? Okay, I have to admit, the other day I was at a meeting and somebody had looked at the yellow pages in the last 5 years. But this proves a point. Where do you get how do you go find somebody? You go to your search engine and you put it in to find it. So if you have a small business in an area that doesn't have coverage, how are they going to find you? And so what happens is they have to make a decision. Do they stay there or do they leave? And so if they leave, that hurts the economy of that rural area. So we want to make sure it's out there for everybody, and also for kids out there when they're in school, for telehealth. Because again, being on the committee, you know, pretty soon you're going to, with access to healthcare, you're going to pull out your iPhone, and what you're going to do is you're going to put a little device along with it, and they'll be able to take your blood pressure and check all these other diagnostics on you at home. So we want to make sure it gets out there, and so we want to make sure that the truly unserved areas are served first. The underserved areas we want to get to, but one of the things I don't want to see happen is where an administrator out there, somebody says, well, we're going to change these definitions, and all of a sudden those areas that might have service are going to be considered unserved or underserved, and all of a sudden we're going to see the more metropolitan and the suburban areas being served before we get it out to the rural areas. So it's really important that we do that. And so it's important, especially when you think about what used to be called the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, or now the Affordable Connectivity Program, that we want to make sure that the FCC is doing its job, making sure that there's no waste, fraud, or abuse out there, and that's again why we hold hearings. And we have to make sure that we have constant communications back and forth. And one of the things I've been, again, blessed with my years on the committee is being able to sit down with the regulators all the time or all of the phone and just work through things with them as they hear what their problems are there or what I believe what we need to be doing at the same time. Spectrum is another big issue that we're all talking about, because if you don't have the spectrum out there, how are you going to get the service? And unfortunately, we're in a situation right now, especially when we think about the authority we have to have for our auctions. We actually have no auction authority out because it expired. And the House had pushed through legislation to get it to May 19th, because on March the 9th it expired. But now we're in a situation we don't have coverage or that authority out there on the spectrum side. So, and again, if we can't get that spectrum out there, how are we going to get more people connected? And the other thing is that what spectrum brings in, because again, when we have the auctions, it goes into the treasuries and it also goes to pay for a lot of different things. So, if you remember back quite a good number of years ago when FirstNet, we were working on that. We used spectrum auction money to help there. We need the spectrum auction money for doing what else? Well, rip and replace. When you look at what happened with Huawei and when we decided that they were not a trusted network, ripping that out, but we have to replace it and pay for it. And so we're also using funding there that we want to use for this under the spectrum auctions. So we want to make sure that we have a good approach to this, that we get it done. But again, we've got to have the spectrum auction. And I really want the authority not to be, what we've been doing like 2-month or 3-month or 5-month or 6-month extension. We need to get something out there for several years so everybody knows what the rules are, so you don't end up with everybody out there, because it's just like in private business, nobody goes out there and plans like the federal government does for a week. We might pass a CR or something like that in the years past saying that we're going to run the federal government for a week. Nobody out there in private industry would ever do something like that. So we want to make sure that we get the auction authority and get it done so that we can move forward on it. If you were watching TV last week, we had the hearings on with TikTok. And, Mr. Chu came around previously and met with all of it, I think all but about 3 members on our side prior to the hearing. But the one question I asked him was this. I said, can anybody in China access your information? He didn't give me an answer. So the first question, when we got talking about, because I first was talking about situations with Section 230 and also if they should have coverage, especially with these competitions. Unfortunately, they were put up on their website, whether it was blackout where a young girl died from strangulation, was the question, though, of, okay, can anybody access it? And it turns out, yeah, they can. So the question that becomes is, as we go forward and went through the hearing, and this is one of the hearings, I know Buddy Carter, who's my vice chair on the committee, started his 5 minutes of questioning with this. He said, welcome to the most bipartisan committee in Congress. Now, if you would have been around for about 5 hours later when we were in a markup, you wouldn't have thought that. But you could not identify a Republican or a Democrat that day asking questions if you didn't know who they were. Because people are concerned about on the national security side and who has access to this information. And when you look at the privacy legislation that was put together that Kathy Morris-Rogers, the chair of the committee this year, and Frank Pallone, who's now the ranker, and it was just reversed in the last Congress, the legislation that came out on on the privacy legislation, that we've got to have something. It's just not dealing with TikTok; it's dealing with everybody. But in the other part of that is how do we protect our kids? So I think that when you look at what came out of the hearing is that there's going to be more discussion on this. We're going to have to move forward on it. But it's really important because, again, when you look at the number of people that, get their information from the internet and from these different platforms, it's going to be important for us to make sure we get the job done and get it done right. And again, this is why it's important to have the hearings, and this is important why we have future hearings, but also as we move forward. But the one thing I do want to mention as I close is this. Our doors are always open. Please stop by if you got anytime you want to sit down and talk, because it's important for me to hear from you. I know when I'm back home, people say, what's a standard day like when you're down there? And I say the short day is 7 to 7, the normal day is 13 to 15 hours. And one of the things that's important for me, though, is when I have people in my office, and this is what I really missed during COVID, to have people in the office to be able to go over issues that are important to you and how we can work through things. So that's the way I believe in working legislation. I'm the best thing I ever bought for my office in all the years now this is my 9th term in Congress. I bought 8 folding chairs so I can get about 16 people in my office at one time. And I can have the pros, the cons, and the interested parties on at one time so everybody can hear what everybody else is saying. But it's also important that I have you all come in so I can hear what you're thinking. So I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all, but please, anytime, the door is always open. So thank you very much.
Take one question.
Yeah, sure.
I mentioned that Congressman Latta is chairing a hearing at 10:30, but he has agreed to take one question, so you can think of one. And I'm calling. I just want to say, I read that just within the past week or so, you guys, with you chairing the committee, passed about 15 bills, I think, and it looked like most of them were unanimously.
Yeah, it was bipartisan.
So I haven't figured that out. That's pretty amazing, but congratulations on that. So with that, I'm going to call on Lynn Stanton here for just one question for the Congressman. It'll come. It'll come.
You mentioned the ACP and the need to avoid waste, fraud, and abuse, but it is going to run out of money eventually. Do you see a legislative vehicle to get some more money appropriated to keep that program going?
On which one again, please?
I'm sorry, the ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program?
Well, you're talking about the from the old EBB?
Yeah,
That money? Yeah. Well, yeah, again, there's a lot of dollars that are out there, and again, that's the one thing we want to make sure that we're having the hearings and the oversight on, because again, my concern is that it's getting to where it needs to be first, and so when I've talked to NTIA and FCC, it's always like we want to make sure that those dollars are getting to the correct locations. But again, there's a lot, it's hard to believe when you talk about $42 billion that came through just the infrastructure package. So I said there's another 18 out there, so you're looking at over 60. So we want to make sure those dollars are spent wisely and we know where they're going. So thank you.
Once again, Chairman Latta,
This is Bob.
Bob, thanks so much. It was great to have you here again.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.